Word of introduction perhaps is in order. My name is Tzan. Some of you may remember that I preached at the end of September. If you don't know me, most Sundays I sit over in that general area with my wife and youngest daughter Lucy at this service. Our oldest daughter Maya is a student at Temple University in Philadelphia. I am currently a professor of church history, mission, and Methodist studies at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. I'm also an ordained elder within the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and over the course of my career, I have served churches for 20 years all around the conference, but most recently at St. Paul's and Gaither United Methodist Churches in Sykesville. I'm grateful to Pastor Jenny for the invitation to preach this Sunday, this first Sunday of Advent, this season where we begin to prepare for the celebration of Christ's birth at Christmas, and also to prepare ourselves for Christ's promised return, when he promises to set all things aright. The gospel reading for this morning comes from a part of the gospel according to Luke that is sometimes referred to as the little apocalypse, which is a term that bears some explanation. Because in popular usage, the word apocalypse has come to mean something catastrophic, civilization-ending, world-shaking events, often including zombies. Right? Now, the actual meaning of the word, though, is much friendlier. It has a much happier connotation. It means a revelation. That moment when the clouds finally clear and you can see clearly. When something that was obscured comes into focus. When something that is covered is uncovered. And you can see things as they truly are. So, for example, 25 days from now, on Christmas Day, when you unwrap your presents, it will be an apocalypse. Now you may be thinking, yes, after the kids have opened their presents and the wreckage of that process is all about the living room, and one child is crying because they've come down from the emotional and sugar high and the dog is rampaging through the living room, and parents feel like zombies after lack of sleep. Apocalypse sounds about right. That's not what I mean. The apocalypse is when the presents are unwrapped. When they're no longer covered with colored paper, and what they are is revealed for everyone to see. That it's really the present you wanted, and not just a box covered with paper. In this passage, Jesus wants us to see our world as it really is. Now, the irony is that this is not a particularly easy passage to understand. But there are 2 points, I think, that he wants us to attend to. First, for many and various reasons, we are prone to miss, to not see, to not perceive the work of God in the world. And so we need to be intentional and alert and attentive to God's movement, to look out of the world with hope for signs of God's presence. And second, we are to inhabit the world with that hope, to decorate the world with signs of God's coming redemption. We're to live not in fear, but as a people of hope, knowing that the reign of God is at hand. It's very close. It's near. As I mentioned, it's a bit of a difficult passage, but at its core, Jesus offers an easy image for us to hold on to. He said, pay attention to the fig tree. In fact, all the trees, he said. You know how in early spring, as soon as they sprout leaves that you can see, you know that summer is coming. It's already near, he says. The tiniest little buds on the twigs of trees are a small sign of a new season coming. It's not here yet, but it's coming. If it's a fruit-bearing tree, in time that tree will bloom flowers and bear a juicy, ripe fruit. But there's no sign of that in the spring, when it's still cold and all that's on the twig is the tiniest little bud. But that little bud, if you look at it, it is a sign of the sweet, crisp apple that will come in fall. Jesus says, look at the world in the same way. Look out and see signs of God's reign among us now, because they point to a much greater fulfillment in time. Now, it's true, if we look at the trees, at least most trees right now, we won't see any buds on them. This time of year, most trees stand like bare sticks on the landscape. And it may be fair to say that what is true for trees is true for much else. As we look out at the world, at this time, things seem bleak and barren. To be sure, the days are darker, nights are longer. And this time of year, skies seem almost always gray. But more importantly, as we consider our common life in a global community, in our country, maybe for you things look bleak. Indeed, as you look out at the world, it's easy to become discouraged by what we see. You become worried about what the future will hold. And from there, to give in to despair and to give up hope. Now, as you heard Jesus said, people in his day, he said people will look at signs of things happening in the world, in the sun and the moon and the stars, and they'll be so concerned that they will faint from fear and foreboding. And maybe you get it. Maybe looking at the world's foreboding, fear seems about right. But in a surprising twist, Jesus said, as for you, my followers, when these things begin to take place, that cause others to be filled with fear, you stand up, raise up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. As followers of Jesus, when things look bleak, it is not the time to withdraw in fear, but rather to watch for signs of hope. Now, there are lots of reasons why we can miss signs of God's movement and action in the world. But our own feelings of fear and foreboding can be a big one. Our worries about the world can blind us to what God is doing in the world. I'll give you a small example. A few years ago on Christmas Eve, I was leading worship at the church I was serving at the evening service when the lights were dimmed and we were just about to, celebrate that beautiful and holy moment where we celebrate that in Christ God has come into the world as a light that shines in the darkness. And the darkness cannot, will not overcome it. So we lit the candles, and the light of Christ spread throughout the sanctuary, and we sang, "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright." As the light of Christ spread throughout the sanctuary, transforming the darkness of the sanctuary, well, it's a holy moment. But on this particular Christmas Eve, I kind of missed it. Because I looked down at my bulletin to remind myself of what was going to happen next in the worship service, and I realized that I couldn't read it. The light was just too dim. I couldn't make out any words on the page. It was too blurry. I'd never had that problem before, but as I'd grown older, I couldn't see in dim light as well as I once had. It happens to many of us, but that's not the point. The point is, in that moment, I was more worried about my blurred vision and about missing what was going to happen next in the worship service that I didn't see. I didn't observe and marvel at the beauty of the lit sanctuary and the song that was being sung in front of me. My worry prevented me from seeing the living testimony of Christ's transforming presence in the world right in front of me. Didn't really matter, really. The service went on fine. It didn't really matter that I didn't remember exactly what was going to happen next. All I really needed to do was lift up my head and see the light spreading. Bad vision and all. I want to be clear that I'm not saying, and I'm certain Jesus isn't saying, that there aren't real problems in the world that we need to see. No, there is real injustice, sin, and unrighteousness in the world. There are reasons to be acutely concerned about the state of the world that we live in. But our first step in dealing with such problems as followers of Jesus is to lift up our heads, to remind ourselves the hope we have in God's coming redemption. And with heads held high, to search the world for signs of God's action. So yes, we see the problems that are in the world, but we are also looking for signs of God's reign. And in that way, we can see our world as it really is. Yeah, it's a world that sometimes seems bleak. But it's also a world that God so loved, that God came into it to redeem it. And signs of that redemption are everywhere. We just look for them. So I want to invite you this Advent to do just that. Now, of course, this is not the season where we can look for buds or even leaves on the trees. But rather to take the effort, be intentional about looking for other signs of God's redeeming work around us. One thing you can do is you can look for things that are beautiful. Even in this dark and gray season, there is abundant beauty in the world. And the beauty we see is a reminder of the glorious world that God created for us. The beauty in things that we make is a reminder that we are co-creators with God. Let those glimpses of beauty strengthen your hope. You can look for things in the world that are true. Now, this may take more discernment, to be honest, because the fact is that there are powerful people and powerful institutions who will claim that they are telling you the truth, but they are not. That does not mean that there aren't people who do speak the truth, who stand up for what is true. Let those examples strengthen your hope. Look for things that are good. Look for signs of people expressing love and care for one another, particularly for those who are vulnerable. When people demonstrate their love for a neighbor, their hospitality to the stranger and the foreigner, this is a good thing in the world, and let it strengthen your hope. The other thing to keep in mind, while we are looking for signs of God at work in the world, there are also ways that we can offer those signs for others to see. In many respects, this is the old saying, it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. Lighting that candle is a sign of your own hope, but it also brightens the world for others. Actually, Jesus' mention of the fig tree reminded me of my favorite story from the revolutions of 1989. As you might remember, I mentioned I'm a historian, and that was a transformative year in world history, as you may know or remember. In that year, people in countries around the world rose up against dictatorial regimes. It began in China with student protests in Tiananmen Square. By the end of the year, the Berlin Wall had come down, and democratic governments were being established and taking root in Eastern Europe. You may remember or have seen some of the enduring images of that time. The picture of the solitary man, armed only with a plastic shopping bag, facing down the tank, China. I see that picture, and I am filled with hope at the courage he demonstrated. You may remember the images of the people dancing on top of the Berlin Wall. That barrier that had divided a country and really a continent for decades had become a dance floor. I see that, and I'm filled with hope. Because I know that attempts to divide people never really work in the long run. They don't last. But as I said, my favorite story, I've never seen a photo of it, but it comes from Romania in Eastern Europe. That time was being ruled by a dictator named Nicolae Ceausescu. And as other communist governments around Romania fell and embraced democratic reforms, Ceausescu held out and, in fact, gave a speech in December of that year saying that he would never give up power. Now, actually, what he said was he would only give up power when pears grow on fig trees, which apparently is a Romanian saying, akin to when pigs fly or when hell freezes over. In other words, never. It's never going to happen. Pears are never going to grow on fig trees. I'm never going to give up power, he was saying. But that night, Romanian university students bought all the pears they could and hung them on trees of the capital, like Christmas ornaments. People awoke the next morning to discover pears adorning not only fig trees, but all the trees. A sign of hope. The dictator's never was actually now. And by the end of the month, he was overthrown. That's the second thing I wanted to invite you to do this Advent, is decorate the world around you. Yes, decorate it with greens and lights and a tree and stockings and all those other fun things. But also decorate the world with signs of hope for others to see. So that when they lift up their heads from their worry and fear, they will know that God's redemption is coming. Looking straight ahead, I can see the angel tree there. When you give a gift from the angel tree, you're decorating the world with the sign of God's redemption. When you serve a chicken pot pie at the community table to our neighbors, or package meals for the Rise Against Hunger, understand that 10,000 packages in October just were sent to the Philippines. When you do that, you're decorating the world with the sign of God's redemption. When you teach a child in Sunday school the stories of our faith, you're decorating the world with the sign of God's redemption. And when we gather in the sanctuary to sing songs of praise to our newborn King and pray for peace on earth, we're decorating the world with signs of God's redemption. These things may seem small, but in many respects, that's the point. They are just signs of the great transformation that we believe Christ will bring. And so until then, lift up your heads, for Christ, our Redeemer, is coming. Thanks be to God. Amen.